We're going to begin the program now. And to do so, I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today. My name is Alex Aboud and I work for CMHA here in Edmonton. And pleased to welcome everyone to today's session on rethinking suicide prevention for men and boys. To begin, we acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. We thank you again for joining us today. This event is a part of Mental Health Week. Now in its 70th year, CMHA Mental Health Week is marked across the country and aims to raise awareness about mental health concerns in our community and to empower all of us to do more. We hope you've been able to join us for some other sessions earlier in the week. We also have our last one tomorrow at lunch on esports and mental health, which you can register for until 5 p.m. today. For today's session, you should see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please submit any questions you have there and we will get through as many of them as we can. As Professor Long was saying, that it might get a bit uncomfortable as we will be discussing some sensitive content, and we acknowledge that can be triggering. If you need support at any time, whether it's during this session or afterwards, please call our 24/7 distress line at 780-482-4357. To begin, I'd like to introduce our host for this session, Dr. David Long. Dr. Long is a professor of sociology at the King's University in Edmonton. His primary teaching and research interests include men and masculinities, men's health, mass media, gender, and Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal relations. David is committed to cultivating a deeper understanding and appreciation for the experiences, strengths, and contributions of diverse populations in Canada, and explores this in his book, Visions of the Heart, Canadian Aboriginal Issues, which received numerous awards. David works with a variety of men's groups, human services organizations, and levels of government, and recently served on a national task force to establish a Canadian men's health network. He is currently a part of the Canadian Father Involvement Initiative. Welcome to Dr. Long and to all of our panelists. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Alex. And welcome again, everybody. What I want us to think about today and to engage is both what it means to be a man and what's the relationship between that and what it means to be human, and how can one actually get in the way of the other. And so what I'd like us to begin with today, we were initially going to start with me giving a presentation, but I thought in the spirit of, the message of Mental Health Week and supports for men, I want to begin by challenging one of the fundamental myths, stereotypical myth surrounding men and masculinities. And that myth is that men don't talk about our lives. We don't like to talk about our lives. We don't like sharing. We don't like sharing what's going on, both in terms of activities that we're engaged in, but particularly how we feel about those, how we feel about our lives. In my roughly 30 years of working with men in all kinds of contexts, I have yet to find a man that doesn't want to talk about his life if he feels as though he is in a safe place, if he senses that the people he's with can be trusted. And so I'm privileged today to introduce three such men who have been a part of the men's support group scene for a number of years here in Edmonton. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to briefly read a bio that the men sent me, a few sentences each. and then I will introduce them, and they'll take about 5 minutes each to tell a little bit about their stories. Then we'll proceed to my presentation, and then we'll go to questions and answers following. So Dean Adam, our first presenter, was born and raised in Edmonton. Dean is 65 years old and has been retired from his career as a firefighter for 8 years. He is now divorced and has 3 great kids and 2 wonderful grandchildren. Dean participated in a weekly City of Edmonton men's support group for approximately 5 years. Teddy Price is originally from Jamaica and has lived in Edmonton for over 7 years. He is currently separated and not employed, but he's working as a founding member of a men's peer support group called STEP, Safe Transitions, Effective Progress. Teddy also contributed for a number of years to the City of Edmonton's Men Without Hats support group, which, by the way, has been canceled by the City of Edmonton, due again to having to decide where to put resources. Chuck Mckenna is a 55-year-old divorced father with 2 children, runs his own business, Lion and Shield Marketing. Chuck was a single dad of 2 children for 9 years and is now experiencing, much like me, the empty nest syndrome. Chuck believes that supporting men's mental health is critical for men being better husbands and partners and fathers, and also so that men can be positive examples for other men. So as I mentioned, all of these men appreciate their men's support group experience and believe that men should not be ashamed to admit that they need help. And so I'd like to invite our men. So Dean, can you kick things off for us, please? Thanks. You need to unmute.
Can you hear me now? Well, thanks for letting me join for the meeting today. I'm kind of used to going first with the last name Adam. I'm sure Mr. Aboud is the same thing. I'm used to it. I won't lie. I've been a little nervous about talking. It's rightly so, I think. I'm talking to a lot of experts in the field, but I'm kind of on the lived experience side of things here. And as the intro said, I was brought up in a man up sort of world with my job. Prior to that, generation of my dad, World War II guy, that kind of, to put it in a real layman's terms, I've been a stuffer for a lot of my years. That's how I put it. It's just being a stuffer. We just put that one in the pocket and leave it alone, and it'll go away. And I'd have to say it didn't go away. What brought me to the program, and that is, it was another relational. I've been divorced, plus another relation, both long term, and where's my thought? I was in, once that broke up, I had no idea. That wasn't in my picture, wasn't in my screen that that was going to happen to me. But of course, I went into a deep depression, just a total smog, you might call it, of isolation. I was full of shame, blame, resentful, but just kind of stuck to what I knew with my job. You man up and get over it and go do something else. And it just didn't work. And it felt like it wasn't working, to the point where my kids kind of saw that I was in trouble. I knew it, but I didn't. They're the ones that pointed me towards 311. And I somehow ended up, after 4 months of pain, it was at least 4 months before I found Christian. And we started our weekly meetings, and I was eventually put into or asked to or join the Men with Hats. And prior to that, I don't think I could have joined. I wasn't in the right headspace. And Christian knew that and invited me when I was in the right space. So like talking about like the suicide part of things, I've been exposed to it a lot in my job or my ex-job, anywhere from kids to women to you name it. I've seen it. I've seen the other side of it. And even with my last partner, she had a son, a 30-year-old son that committed suicide and caught me off guard. I was the one to discover him, and kind of got through that, I guess, with funerals and stuff. It was a hard time. And with me being a stuffer and my partner at the time, she didn't seek help. And so, of course, I gave her, even though I was stuffing things, I kind of gave her some latitude for her loss. And I wasn't close to him. And he came over Christmas Eve the one year, happiest I've ever seen him. Everything was great. He was working, ta-da. And the next thing you know, 7 days later, he was hanging in the basement. So that really affected me. And I just kept on stuffing and stuffing and stuffing. And even more so, it came down to my son, my youngest son, who had the same ideation. He was in Montreal going to school, and he was in that suicidal, in regards to being gay. He was coming out. And so that really hit. But it's come down to where, with the support groups, that's where I found myself. I don't think I could sit with a person, but being in a safe place, talking with other men from all walks of life, it was everything. And I can't, I'm in a way better place for it. And I'm sorry, I'm kind of emotional, but that's me.
Thanks, Dean.
So I see my time's up, so I'll leave it at that. So I could talk for a full hour. It's a little garbled in that, but
No,
I've got a lot to say.
that was wonderful, Dean. Thanks very much. Teddy, you want to unmute and start?
Sure. Thank you, Dean. That was very authentic. I just want to also thank the panel here for having me. It's an honor. Anything that has to do with men's health and well-being, I'm definitely something in terms of an advocate for. My own situation, I was going through an unhealthy relationship and dynamics of that. My own ego aspects of maybe what I thought masculinity meant to be a man. Culturally, I came from a culture which is very patriarchal. And I realized also too that living in this culture, there are also dynamics of the same patriarchy in terms of how they see males, men, right? And I identify with that from just growing up around it. And I found that I also kept it when I moved here. It wasn't really helpful in the relationship because for me, the dynamics of taking care of myself was so removed from my thinking. It was finding identity and purpose through the persons that were around me, right? So not taking care of my sense, my own feelings, ignoring my own hurt, right? I would do that. And as Dean said, stuffing and avoidance was a huge part of that, right? Because that was part of the concept of being a man for me, that I learned from my dad. And I imagine he learned from his dad. It wasn't helpful because in a relationship where things really started to become very painful for me, I ignored that, right? I kept the same thinking of, well, as a man, I'm supposed to find all these solutions, and ignoring the biggest one in the room as avoidance, my own solution for my own pain. That was a period of time I reflect on now as a very numbing part of my existence, because it was me at a place where I lost self-worth. There was a lot of shame. There was a loss of identity, because I was coming to this place where I've done all this stuff. I've got the family, got things rolling. Why isn't things working out? All right, there is something wrong here. And normally it goes back to the negative self-talk. I must be doing something wrong here. I eventually reached out when the pain was so severe in the relationship, because there are dynamics of it that I wasn't in control of. So I reached out to social services, and I got in touch with a social worker, Barry Greenspan, and we had a sat down, and may he rest in peace. He's deceased right now, but I do remember him consciously, because the stuff he told me that day, I didn't understand till maybe 4 or 5 years later how significant it was, in terms of him saying to me, you know, there's some stuff here that you are not really connecting with. And at that time, I didn't understand anything. I just wanted him to fix, right? I want to remove this pain because I've been avoiding so long. So I went to my first group, Men Without Hats, and it was interesting because that first day in that group, it countered a lot of norms that I've seen in my whole life with how men operate, right? The stoicism, and it's also to the avoidance of feelings. I saw guys cry in front of me. It shook me. It actually scared me, because the feeling of what was happening in the space also somehow in an odd way said to me, hey, acknowledge what you're feeling and also be brave enough to share that. It took me almost 4 weeks before I actually started sharing, but I found just being able to talk in a space that was safe, and in a space that also allowed me to be authentic, right? Not just the thinking, the feeling aspects of it was really helpful. So here am I today. I'm still in my transition of learning, and I just want to say for all the men out there, it's definitely a process, but don't give up on yourself, because really there's value in who you are as a man in so many ways, rather than just the one dimension what we're taught mainly in society. But that would be my spiel. Thank you.
Okay. Cheers, Teddy. Thanks very much. So Chuck, do you want to unmute and share with us? Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Teddy and Dean, for sharing. You guys are awesome as always. And I just want to say it's amazing to be a part of this panel. I can't speak loud enough of how men's groups have meant to me. I was married for 15 years, and then my wife had an affair, and the marriage was falling apart. We tried a couple times to reconcile, and it was causing more damage to our kids. And as you can imagine, at the beginning, when you first feel that pain, that sting, you feel anger or love. You don't have any other feelings. You don't really understand what's going on. You want to blame everything on the other person. There was some financial stuff that went on that really hurt me too. And it was a bad time in my life. And then my son lived with me. My daughter lived with my ex, and then my daughter ran away. And we found her at a friend's house, so she was safe, and she came to live with me at that point. And then I went from being a husband and taking care of my wife and my kids and my family all the time to then taking care of my kids. All right. That was my identity. is I have to be the strong person in the house. I have to make sure I'm here to pick up the pieces of anything. And in that, you lose yourself a lot of things. I forgot who I was beforehand. Before I ever got married, I used to do success seminars. I used to teach people on business stuff, and it was a really interesting time to not knowing who I was. So about 5 years after the marriage broke down, I was really just going, what am I doing? What am I doing? I'm hurting my kids. I'm angry all the time. I'm not really listening properly. So I went and talked to my doctor. He got me into a Alberta health worker psychologist that we talked a bit. And she said, you know what? You're going through sort of a midlife crisis. What I think you really need is a men's group. So here's Men Without Hats. And I was like, okay, like men talking about feelings. What? No, we don't do that, right? I mean, I'm the jock. I'm the guy that went out and played sports, and you toughed it up no matter what. And I was feeling very vulnerable. So when I went into the Men Without Hats group, the first meeting, set at ease a little bit. Hey, you don't have to share unless you want to. You have the right to pass. That right to pass meant a lot to me. And I passed for the first 3 weeks before I opened up. And it was a comforting thing to know that other men are willing to share, other men are willing to open up. And then when I felt that I was in a safe space, I could open up, I could share deeply and not be judged. I could be accepted for my failures. And it was there that I learned that I can't just keep pointing the fingers outwardly. I have to point them inwardly to deal with my stuff, to deal with the stuff that's hurting me. I had to be real with myself. And you know what? That hurts. When you look at yourself and have to be real, it hurts. There's pain, there's suffering, but there's also some great success. I was talking to Christian earlier today, and I told him, I said, every time I share my story, every time I talk about some of the stuff that I'm going through, it helps me heal a little bit more. And that's what this today is as much about helping and sharing, but it's also about healing me and continue to heal me. I mean, COVID has obviously affected a lot of us. Men Without Hats program got closed down, as David was saying, and that hurt a lot. I had no place to go. So what was I supposed to do? I had to turn around. And I was looking, scrambling. So I was going to see a psychologist. And then I reached out to Sean and said, hey, I'm going to start my own program because this is getting insane. And he said, Dean and Teddy and Christian are doing some stuff with steps. And I got back in contact, and again, amazing work. So that to me is vital. I just want to leave with one analogy of what a men's group is. When I was younger, I had a friend that was going to commit suicide, and that was before cell phones. He calls me at 3 a.m. I pick up my phone and he says, I'm going to the high level bridge and I'm jumping. I get in my car, I drive there. I'm 18, I drive there. I'm just a friend, not thinking of anything. I'm just going to be a friend. When he saw me, he talked, he got in my car, he drove away. And that's what the men's group did for me. They took me off that bridge. They helped give me that safe, confident place where I had a friend that's just reaching out that hand to help me. And that's what men we're lacking sometimes, because we let our pride, our egos jump in. And I'm very sorry, but men, it's okay to talk about your feelings. And that's my presentation. My time's up. My alarm just went off. So thank you very much for letting me share.
Wow. That was awesome, guys. Thanks very much. Sort of a living example of real courage, I think, and real strength. So deeply appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable and share a bit of your stories with us. As you said, Dean, you could probably talk a lot longer. So what I want to do is I want to jump right into my presentation here. I'm setting my timer as well, and let's just get right into it. So the title for this session is actually not as advertised. But I prefer the title Rethinking Men's Health, from preventing illness and suicide to promoting life. And so in all of my work, and largely in all of my life, I'm animated by two questions. And I actually see these questions as quite sociological, given that I'm a sociologist and have been, good grief, for 40 years now. So my two beginning questions and animating life questions are, what gives males in all of our diversity hope? And I'd actually put that out to all of you. What gives you hope in your life? And then relatedly, what hinders males in all of our diversity from experiencing hope? And so in relation to the health and well-being of males then, what role do gendered beliefs, attitudes, scripts, expectations, behaviors, contexts, etc., play in relation to male health? And so when I ask that question, I'm thinking not only about the lives of males, but everyone else that's in their life. Because we are constantly being socialized. We are constantly promoting expectations. And we are constantly telling males when they're not living up to those expectations. Sometimes it's very blatant. Sometimes it's very, very subtle. Sometimes it's very conscious. Most of the time it's quite unconscious or subconscious. Many, many aspects of our life in society, we get messages all throughout our lives, consistently every day, reminding us of what it means to be a man. And so I actually want to sort of step back for a moment and say, it's really important, I think, in this work, and at the time we're in, to not pit males against females, to not sort of suggest that by supporting males, we need to take away resources from females. That's not at all what we're saying. We're focusing today on the lives of males as whole human beings, and so working together. Then my fourth question is, so how can we cultivate then a more positive, proactive, and hopeful approach to understanding and addressing and preventing mental health problems and suicide involving males? So I wanted to just shock you with the visual picture. This is 2018 in Canada. Men ages 55 to 64. 743 male deaths by suicide. And that's what we know officially. Any researcher worth their salt would always tell you and would humbly admit that when we talk about official statistics, there's much that goes unreported. I think a good personal example for me, and this is very hard, was my stepfather. My stepfather grew up in a very large family. Father was very abusive and alcoholic. 11 children. Biff was one of the youngest. And his mother booted his father out of the house when he was 8 years old. They did their best for a while, but all of the children eventually had to go out and work to support the family. So Biff had a grade 7 education, a brilliant man, incredibly creative, beautiful singing voice. He was actually an entertainer. But he also, much like 8 of his siblings, struggled with alcohol. When he was 61 years old, Biff died of cirrhosis of the liver. Now, officially, Biff died by having officially cirrhosis of the liver. He drank himself to death. It's not officially recorded as a suicide. And so I think, and also when we talk about attempts, we need to step back and reflect really carefully about how are we measuring things, and what do we not know and why. And so in terms of, and listening to the stories of the guys, I'm reminded of these two ideas. Joseph Pleck, actually back in the 1970s, was a very prolific writer in the area of men and masculinities. And he noted, he said, while men as a group have power, most men feel powerless in most areas of their lives. So he's highlighting something there. He's highlighting that there are, in terms of gendered expectations, men are expected as a group, and as a group, we do have power. If you are in a group, if you are a man, then by virtue of being in that category, you have power as a man. That says nothing about you as an individual human being. And so the three stories you heard today are so common, right? These men shared their lives. I shared a bit of my story, but it's the very, very rare man that feels powerful in his life, which Michael Kaufman identified as the paradox of masculinity, where he said the rigid gender expectations that are imposed constantly in the lives of males include that we be in control, that we be stoically determined and brave. But the paradox is that those very same rigid expectations are coupled with the fact that each of us individually realize we can't possibly attain them. And so that contributes then to our feelings of uncertainty, our feelings of anxiety, our feelings of fear. So there's the paradox. But there's the gendered male expectation and the individual male experience. So we all know these. What does it mean to be a man? What typical stereotypical characteristics do we associate with being a man, with masculinity? So, I mean, we could have done this exercise. I do it with lots of groups and in my classes, but you know all of them, right? To be a man means we're a hardworking provider. All of the men today, Teddy, Dean, and Chuck told this story. Stoic and independent, we work it through. I love your phrase, your word, Dean, stuffing, right? Suck it up, man up. But also, it's very common that men are associated with celebrating, with partying, with alcohol or drug use, with impulsive behavior and risk-taking behavior, that we're angry and we're prone to conflict, and men are violent. We know that. Well, something interesting when I started looking into men's mental health and doing some reading on men's depression, this was quite a few years ago. And I was struck by the fact that the symptoms of male depression, and so I invite you to read the list, the column on the right-hand side: obsession with work, isolation from family and friends, alcohol, drug use, impulsive, reckless behavior, irritability, anger, and conflict, and outwardly violent and inwardly self-injurious behavior. The fact that if you look at those two columns, right, and you can see that they're exactly the same, that shows that there's a clear connection between masculine gendered expectations and being at risk for suicide. Because depression is, those of you who are expert in the field or who've experienced it know that depression is the #1 risk factor for suicide. Well, all of these symptoms of male depression line up absolutely with masculine stereotypical characteristics. Will Courtney identified the following as another symptom of male depression. It's the experiencing conflict. The man, and I heard this in all their stories, experiencing conflict between what one thinks it means to be a man and who they actually are as a human being. Again, which points to the paradox of masculinity. Well, my sort of cry, my call out is, this isn't simply another symptom. This is the problem, right? This is why men are at risk at suicide. But why is it so hard for us to see this? And I'm going to go very quickly through this because there are too many words and I want there to be time for comments and questions. But all throughout the literature, there are typical explanations for lower female suicide rates and higher attempts for females and higher male suicide rates. Well, and these are just a few of the more prominent ones. But have a look closely at those. Women are more likely than men to seek social support for emotional problems. Women are more responsive to therapeutic treatment for depression than men. Women are more likely to use less lethal, that is, less violent methods when attempting suicide, and to seek help after they've attempted to suicide. And it occurred to me, think for a moment, how would this affect known rates? And what don't we know then about men's suicide? If men don't ask for help, how can we possibly know whether or not they have attempted suicide? So something to think about. And fifth, many ailing men are too proud, intent on being a man, to ask for help. Well, what strikes me about all of these is all of these explanations, which are very common, all of these explanations naturalize, they make it seem natural that women have the ability to ask for help. It's naturally female to do that, right? And men naturally are unable to ask for help. Well, the problem is the naturalization of these perspectives make it so difficult for us to understand and address male depression and suicide, because they fundamentally ignore how gender works. Because what would happen if we told males from the time they were born that they are strong and gentle, that they are nurturing and generous, that they are thoughtful and in need of support, that they are loved and they are capable of loving from the time they are born? How would this contribute to a different way to think about men's health and suicide prevention? Well, what much of the literature highlights is the importance of developing male-friendly approaches, right? And you'll see examples for these in a moment. But I think it's actually more essential that we engage boys and men as whole human beings. So we help identify the problem with rigid gender expectations and how that not only hinders males from asking for help, but it hinders service providers, loving supporters, and family members from actually seeing when a man is asking for help, or a boy. If we don't expect that boys and men can ask for help, well, as I often tell students in my classes, it's very difficult to see what you're not looking for. And so if we promote the idea that it's good for men to talk about their lives, and that men can and do share about their lives when they know they're respected and feel safe, men will do it, and so will boys. Men are also very open to communicating, being communicated to in honest and direct ways. So for example, being told being a man or trying to be a man can be hazardous to your health is an important public service message. We can highlight that relationship problems, money issues, job struggles, and substance abuse are common risk factors for male depression and suicide, and that it takes strength to ask for help. And now, the reason I say that is when in the literature, and I just read an article this morning, and I'm going to finish shortly, but I just read an article on studying intent, suicidal intent over in Europe, a massive study that was done in 2017 or published in 2017. And when those addressing male and female suicide look at intent, and they look at the risk factors, overwhelmingly the attention is given to female depression. Well, while male depression is the #1 risk factor, we can actually see that all of these things that are going on in men's lives, where they're not meeting up with the expectations and struggling, those are not just symptoms, those are also risk factors. And if we can pay more attention to those, then we can see that men are actually struggling and asking for help. There are a number of ways that we can develop strategies for addressing suicide prevention with males. Humor is important in the lives of males. Sometimes it can come across as very coarse, but it treats men in terms of the ways in which most of us have been raised. And that's actually to laugh at ourselves. When I call my buddy a name, the only reason I can do that is because I know that we both know I'm the same. I could just as easily be called that name, right? So what do suicide prevention strategies, oh, my screen's frozen, male-friendly and humanizing suicide prevention strategies for males look like? Well, here's a few examples. And by the way, if any of you are wondering about getting ideas for initiatives or programs or suicide prevention strategies, look at the UK and look at Australia. They are light years ahead of us in terms of recognizing that men are human beings and that men are in need of support, and that men, most importantly, I think, want to change, right? We want the support. We don't want the violence. We don't want to be destructive. And so what I'm going to ask us to do now is I'll turn it to Alex to invite questions and answers.
Okay, thank you, David. There's a few minutes left for questions. We did have a quick one, just wanting to know what year, like the stat you provided with the 743 deaths by suicide, what year was that from?
That was 2018. Okay,
great. If there's any other questions, please put them in the Q&A. And we have a couple more minutes to get through them.
And by the way, I would say if people have sort of research or even sort of data type questions, I'd strongly encourage them to contact the Center for Suicide Prevention in Calgary. We're actually working with them and Living Hope and Edmonton's suicide prevention strategy. And they are wonderful sources of information for everything from suicide data to the most up-to-date research.
Good. Well, last call for questions.
I also know, before you sign off, Alex, I also know this was a tremendous amount of information and stuff to think about. I'm more than happy to share my PowerPoint presentation with anybody, or to engage in conversation either following this or via email. I can be found at david.long@kingsu.ca. And yeah, I welcome anything that anyone would want to chat about. So thanks very much.
Great. Yeah, just a couple of questions about looking for more resources. I think CSP is a great one for that. Maybe, yeah, just if you have any other resources you can suggest quickly before we wrap up, and And I guess a question I would ask for Dr. Long or for any of the panelists who want to weigh in, just like, well, what's one thing you like anyone can do in their lives, like one simple action, you know, to support people in their lives?
Great question, Alex. What people can do to support men in their lives is be there to encourage them to step out of their the shadows of what societal people say men need, and for men to take that step and say, I need help. That first step of admitting that you need help is the best step in the world.
Yeah, and I would say sort of in a, you know, along with that, pay attention to the boys and the men in your lives. Your mates, your partners, your children, yeah, all over your life. There are boys and men, and I'm going to keep saying this, that are real human beings that don't have all the answers, and that want to love and be loved, as does every other human being. And so be mindful of them. And if you ask a man in your life, if you're have an intimate partner, and you ask them what's going on, and you ask them what's really going on, be prepared to be unsettled. I remember the first time I told my wife, Karen, that, and we've been married 35 years. This is quite a few years ago, when I told her that I was very confused and I didn't know what was going on in my life, a university professor. And she was kind of shocked and taken aback and sort of confused herself and didn't know how to respond. That's going to be a common response. So I would encourage you to be ready to be surprised and then be open. I would also encourage any of you who want to know about resources to contact Christian Gutierrez, who's on this panel, but also Michael Hoyt. They work for the city of Edmonton, and they're much more familiar with whatever resources are available in the city. You can also Google men's support groups in Edmonton. There are a number of them that are currently offered. I can think of Anchor Men's Counseling and out of Cornerstone. And there's a number of others as well. Men's Sheds is starting up. Michael Hoyt can talk to you about that as well. So I would encourage you, if you are struggling or if you have questions or if you would like to hang out with other men and chat in a supportive manner, then search it out, and we're there. And thanks very much for participating in our session. Greatly appreciate your attention.
Yeah. Could I just say a parting message on that to piggyback? Men a lot of times need to be listened to, just not being heard, because a lot of times it takes time for a man to feel safe. So when he finds that there's a space he can feel safe and someone validates what they're hearing, not necessarily just telling him how it feels, but to create a safe space, I think a lot of time it creates a space where he can release his stuff rather than wearing the mask of just numbing and keeping things in himself. So I think that's very helpful too. If we can create spaces for men where they feel safe to actually speak on issues that they're facing. Thanks.
And thanks again to you, brave men. You're amazing.
And yeah, just to wrap up, we want to thank everybody for, well, our panel first and foremost, but thank you everyone for your participation and attendance today and for the great questions. And we wish you all a good day, and take care of yourselves first and foremost, and take care of the people in your lives. And I think that's the best thing all of us can do for Mental Health Week and every week of the year.
And thanks, Alex. And be well all.